What happens when a royal sits down for what should be a routine morning show interview, only to have the hosts cross lines that were never meant to be crossed? Today, we're diving into an explosive confrontation that left Prince Harry storming, offset, producers scrambling, and viewers witnessing one of the most uncomfortable moments in television history. This isn't your typical celebrity interview gone wrong. This is something far more personal and far more devastating. Before we get into it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments what you think really triggered this meltdown. The morning started like any other at the popular talk show studio. Prince Harry had agreed to appear alongside hosts, Jenna and her co-hosts, to discuss his latest charitable initiatives and upcoming projects. What began as a seemingly safe, pre-approved list of topics quickly unraveled into something neither the production team nor Harry expected. "So Harry, let's talk about your work with veterans," Jenna began, her signature warm smile in place as the cameras rolled live across the nation. "Your Invictus Games have been such an incredible success," Harry nodded, looking comfortable in his seat. "Thank you, Jenna. It's been 7 years since we launched the games, and seeing these wounded warriors compete, seeing them reclaim their lives, it never gets old. These men and women have sacrificed everything for their countries." Speaking of sacrifice, Jenna's co-host, Marcus, interjected. "A lot of people have been wondering about your own sacrifices. You've given up your royal duties, moved across the ocean, started a new life. Do you ever regret those choices?" The question lingered a second too long. Harry's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his media training took over. "I don't think of them as sacrifices, Marcus. I think of them as choices, difficult choices but necessary ones for my family's well-being." "Your family's well-being," Jenna repeated, leaning forward slightly. "That's interesting phrasing, because from the outside, it looks like those choices have created quite a bit of distance between you and your family back home." "Every family goes through challenges," Harry replied carefully. "The important thing is that we're building something positive, something that aligns with our values." "But surely you miss certain aspects of your old life," Marcus pressed. "The traditions, the ceremonies, being part of something that's been going on for over 1,000 years." Harry shifted in his seat. "I miss elements of it, certainly, but I don't miss the constraints, that inability to speak truthfully about issues that matter." "Truthfully," Jenna echoed, seizing on the word. "That's something you've talked about a lot in recent years, the importance of truth, of your truth, but some people might argue that truth can be subjective, especially in the context of family dynamics." "I'm not sure what you're getting at," Harry said, a slight edge entering his voice. "Well, you've been very vocal about your experiences, your perspective on events, but there are always multiple sides to every story, aren't there? People who were present who might remember things differently." The studio air seemed to chill. Harry's media-trained smile was becoming more forced by the second. "I've always been careful to speak only about my own experiences," he said slowly. "Of course," Jenna nodded sympathetically. "But when those experiences become public, they're shared in books, interviews, and documentaries, they inevitably affect other people. People who maybe can't respond in the same way, who have different obligations and constraints." Marcus jumped back in. "Speaking of constraints, there's been a lot of speculation about certain conversations, certain alleged comments that may or may not have been made. Without getting into specifics, how do you handle situations where your recollection of events might differ from others who were present?" Harry's hands gripped the arms of his chair a little tighter. "I think everyone should be able to tell their story. That's what I've done, and I stand by it." "But what about accountability?" Jenna asked, her tone still friendly, but with an underlying sharpness. "What about the possibility that in sharing our truth, we might inadvertently misrepresent someone else's intentions or actions? Are you suggesting I've lied about something?" Harry asked directly, his voice low but clear. "Not at all," Jenna replied quickly, raising her hands. "I'm just exploring the complexity of memory, of perspective, especially emotionally charged situations." "Emotionally charged," Harry repeated. "That's an interesting way to describe some of the most painful moments of my life." The live audience was silent now, sensing the growing tension. Camera operators adjusted their shots, capturing every micro-expression. "Harry, I think what we're trying to understand," Marcus said, attempting to sound reasonable, "is how you balance your desire to share your truth with your responsibility to the institution you were born into. To the family that raised you, the family that raised me," Harry said, his voice barely above a whisper, "also failed to protect me in ways that matter. They failed to protect my wife. They failed to learn from what happened to my mother." Jenna's eyes lit up. She knew they were getting close to something explosive. "Your mother," she said carefully. "You've spoken about how the press's treatment of your wife reminded you of what your mother went through. But some might argue the situations were quite different. Your mother was dealing with marital problems, public scrutiny of her relationships, whereas your wife was navigating the challenge of joining an ancient institution with very specific protocols." Harry's expression went completely still. "I'm sorry, are you comparing my wife's treatment to my mother's personal struggles?" "I'm not comparing anything," Jenna replied. I'm just trying to understand your perspective on the parallels you've drawn. My perspective, Harry said, his voice gaining strength and anger, is that both the women I've loved most in this world were systematically destroyed by the same machine. The same people who smile at you in public and brief against you in private. But Harry, Marcus interjected, surely you can see how some people might feel that's a rather serious accusation to make against your own family members. Harry turned to look directly at Marcus, his eyes flashing. Serious accusation? You want to talk about serious accusations? Let's talk about the stories that were planted about my wife while she was pregnant. Let's talk about the complete silence when she was being torn apart in the press. Let's talk about the refusal to correct blatant lies because it might temporarily benefit someone else's narrative. The studio fell into an uncomfortable silence as Harry's words hung in the air. Jenna exchanged a quick glance with Marcus, both realizing they had pushed further than expected, but neither willing to back down. Harry, Jenna said, her voice taking on a more serious tone, those are very specific allegations you're making. When you say stories were planted, briefings were given, are you talking about official palace communications, or are you suggesting something more coordinated? Harry let out a bitter laugh. Official palace communications, that's rich. You think there's a difference? You think when a senior royal's private secretary calls a journalist and suggests they look into a particular angle, that's somehow separate from the institution? But surely you understand, Marcus said, leaning forward, that all public figures, all institutions, have communication strategies. That's just modern media management. Media management, Harry repeated, shaking his head. Is that what you call it when they throw a pregnant woman under the bus to protect someone else's bad week? When they let racist undertones go unchallenged because addressing them might be inconvenient? Jenna's eyebrows rose slightly. Racist undertones. That's a strong word. Harry, can you be more specific about what you mean by that? Harry stared at her for a long moment. Viewers could practically see him weighing his options. You know exactly what I mean. The coverage of my wife from day one was different. The language used, the assumptions made, the stories chosen to highlight. And when we tried to address it, we were told we were being too sensitive, that this was just normal press scrutiny. But Harry, Marcus interjected, the British press has always been tough on royal family members. Your brother and his wife faced intense scrutiny, too, especially in their early years. How do you differentiate between standard press attention and something more targeted? Harry's hands clenched into fists. Standard press attention. You want to compare? The coverage. Let's compare headlines. Let's compare the language used when my sister-in-law held her pregnant belly versus when my wife did the same. Let's compare the reaction when my sister-in-law was emotional versus when my wife showed any human feeling whatsoever. That's an interesting point, Jenna said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. But couldn't some of that difference be attributed to other factors? Different circumstances, different timing, different public moods, different skin color. Several audience members audibly gasped. The camera operators seemed frozen, unsure whether to zoom in or pull back. Jenna recovered first. Harry, that's a very serious allegation to make on live television. It's not an allegation, Harry replied, his voice steady, now almost calm. It's an observation. And if you're uncomfortable hearing it, said plainly, imagine how uncomfortable it was living it. Marcus cleared his throat. But, Harry, surely you can understand how some people might feel that playing the race card, so to speak, might seem like an easy way to dismiss legitimate criticism, or normal press attention. Harry turned to Marcus with a look that could have frozen fire. Playing the race card? Did you just say playing the race card? I didn't mean it that way, Marcus said quickly, clearly realizing his mistake. No, I think you meant it exactly that way, Harry replied, his voice rising for the first time, because that's what people say when they want to dismiss the reality of what happened, when they want to pretend that centuries of institutional racism just magically disappeared because it's inconvenient to acknowledge. Jenna tried to regain control. Harry, I think what Marcus was trying to say is that it's difficult for viewers to know where legitimate criticism ends and prejudice begins. How do we make that distinction? How do you make that distinction? Harry asked incredulously. You start by believing the people who are actually experiencing it. You start by looking at the patterns, the language, the double standards. You start by asking why a woman who dedicated her life to humanitarian work was treated like a manipulative outsider from the moment she appeared in my life. But surely, Marcus said, seeming to have recovered his composure, you can understand that marrying into the royal family comes with certain expectations, certain protocols. Maybe some of the criticism was about how those expectations were being met rather than about personal characteristics. Harry stood up so abruptly that his chair rolled backward. Expectations, protocols. She followed every single protocol. She learned the history. She studied the Commonwealth. She threw herself into every role they gave her, and you know what she got for it. Stories about her making people cry when she was the one being made to cry. Stories about her being difficult when she was being isolated. Stories about her being demanding when she was literally asking for help. Jenna remained seated, but her posture stiffened. Harry, these are very serious accusations you're making about how the palace operates, about how the press functions. Do you have specific examples you can share? Specific examples? Harry laughed, without humor. You want specific examples. How about the time a story ran, claiming my wife reduced a staff member to tears when the reality was the complete opposite? How about the coordinated timing of negative stories that mysteriously appeared whenever someone else in the family was having a bad news cycle? How about the complete silence from the palace when lies were being spread, but the immediate corrections that came out when stories affected other family members? Those are very specific allegations, Marcus said carefully. Can you prove any of that happened? Harry took a step toward the desk where the hosts were seated. Can I prove it? I lived it. My wife lived it. We have emails, we have text messages, we have recorded conversations, we have documentation of every request for help that was ignored, every plea for protection that was dismissed. The tension in the studio was now thick. Security personnel could be seen at the edges of the camera frame, clearly unsure whether to intervene. Harry, Jenna said, her voice cautious now, you're making some very serious allegations about your family, about the institution. Are you sure you want to go down this path on live television? Are you threatening me? Harry asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Not at all, Jenna replied quickly. I'm just suggesting that once certain things are said publicly, they can't be taken back. Relationships can be permanently damaged. Harry stared at her for a long moment. You think my relationships aren't already permanently damaged? You think there's some way back from watching your wife contemplate suicide while the people who were supposed to protect you actively worked to destroy her? You think there's a way back from being told that your wife and child's security isn't a priority because they're not senior enough in the line of succession? Security concerns are obviously serious, Marcus said, but surely those decisions are made based on threat assessments and available resources, not personal feelings. Available resources, Harry repeated slowly. You know what's interesting about available resources? They're always available when it comes to protecting the reputation of certain family members. They're always available when it comes to managing certain scandals. But when it comes to protecting a pregnant woman from death threats, suddenly resources are limited. Jenna leaned back slightly in her chair. Death threats are obviously unacceptable. But surely the police handle those kinds of security issues, Marcus said, rather than the royal family directly. The police handle what they're asked to handle, Harry replied, his voice growing stronger. And when the palace decides that your security isn't a priority, when they decide you're not worth protecting, the police get that message loud and clear. The studio audience was completely silent now, many visibly uncomfortable as the interview spiraled into territory no one had anticipated. Harry remained standing, his chest rising and falling with barely contained emotion. Harry, Jenna said, trying to project calm authority despite the unfolding tension. I think we need to take a step back. You're making allegations that could have serious legal ramifications. Legal ramifications. Harry's voice cracked slightly. You want to talk about legal ramifications? How about the legal ramifications of a coordinated campaign to destroy someone's mental health, of institutional racism, of putting a price on someone's life based on their place in a hereditary hierarchy? Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Harry, with respect, you're talking about your own family. These are people who raised you, who love you. Surely there's some middle ground, some way to acknowledge that mistakes were made without suggesting deliberate malice. Harry turned to face him directly, eyes blazing. Love me. You think people who love you stand by while your wife is driven to the point of wanting to end her own life? You think people who love you refuse to have conversations about the safety of your mixed-race child? You think people who love you brief journalists against your wife while she's carrying their grandchild? But Harry, Jenna interjected, clearly trying to regain control. Surely you understand that the royal family operates within certain constraints. They can't respond to every piece of press coverage. They can't get involved in every controversy. Constraints, Harry repeated with a bitter laugh. There are no constraints when it comes to protecting the heir. There are no constraints when it comes to managing certain family members' scandals. There are no constraints when it comes to briefing positive stories about whoever needs their image polished that week. But suddenly there are constraints when it comes to protecting my wife and child. You keep talking about briefings, Marcus said, his tone sharpening. But these are serious accusations. Are you saying senior members of your family personally called journalists to plant negative stories about your wife? Harry paused, clearly considering his next words. I'm saying the system is designed to protect certain people at the expense of others, and when that system decided my wife was expendable, my family chose the system over us. That's a very serious accusation to make against your father and your brother, Jenna said. My father, Harry echoed. Do you know what he said when I told him about the racist coverage my wife was receiving? He said, that's just how the press works. When I told him about the death threats, he said, we all get them. And when I begged him to do anything to protect his daughter-in-law and grandchild, he said it wasn't his place to interfere with press freedom. The studio was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning sounded deafening. And your brother? Marcus asked softly. Harry's face twisted with pain and anger. My brother chose his future crown over his current brother. He chose protecting the institution over protecting the woman carrying his nephew. He chose silence because speaking up might have been inconvenient for his own image. Harry, Jenna said gently, these are relationships that go back your entire life. Surely there's some way to repair the damage, some way to find common ground. Common ground. Harry's voice rose again. What common ground is there? Harry said. With people who were willing to sacrifice my wife's mental health for a few positive news cycles. What common ground is there with people who decided our pain was worth less than their convenience? Marcus leaned forward. But surely you can understand their position, too. They have responsibilities to the crown, to the country. Sometimes difficult choices have to be made. Harry stared at him in disbelief. Difficult choices. You think choosing between protecting my pregnant wife and protecting the monarchy was a difficult choice? You think watching someone you claim to care about be systematically destroyed and doing nothing about it is just a difficult choice? I'm not defending anyone's actions, Marcus said quickly. I'm just trying to understand the complexity of the situation. The complexity, Harry said, shaking his head. There's no complexity in choosing between right and wrong. No complexity in choosing between protecting an innocent person and protecting an institution. No complexity in choosing between love and power. Jenna tried again to steer the conversation. Harry, what would it take for you to reconcile with your family? What would they need to do or say? Harry looked at her as if she'd just asked him to explain quantum physics to a toddler. Reconcile. You think this is about reconciliation? You think I want to reconcile with people who were willing to watch my wife die rather than admit they were wrong? That's a very dramatic way to put it, Marcus said. Dramatic. Harry's voice cracked. My wife told me she didn't want to be alive anymore. She told me she couldn't see a way forward. She told me she was scared of what she might do to herself. And when I went to them for help, when I begged them to intervene, they told me it was a personal matter. We needed to handle ourselves. The raw pain in his voice was unmistakable. Several people in the audience were visibly crying. And you know what the real tragedy is? Harry continued, his voice breaking. They could have stopped it at any time. One statement could have ended the harassment. One correction could have stopped the lies. One public show of support could have saved her. But they chose not to because protecting her wasn't worth the political cost. Harry, Jenna said softly, I think maybe we should take a break. A break. Harry laughed through what might have been tears. You want to take a break? You brought me here to talk about charity work and ended up psychoanalyzing my family trauma on live television. You pushed and pushed until you got the explosive content you wanted and now you want to take a break. Marcus tried to speak. Harry, we never intended. You never intended what? Harry cut him off. You never intended to ambush me. Never intended to use my pain for ratings. Never intended to force me to relive the worst period of my life for your audience's entertainment. Harry turned and walked toward the edge of the set. You know what? I'm done. I'm done explaining myself to people who refuse to understand. I'm done justifying my choices to people who've never had to make them. I'm done pretending there's some middle ground between protecting the people you love and enabling the people who hurt them. Harry, please, Jenna called after him. Let's just talk this through. Harry stopped and turned back to face the cameras one final time. You want to know the truth? The truth is, I chose my wife and child over an institution that was killing them. I chose love over duty, humanity over protocol, truth over tradition. And I would make that choice again every single day for the rest of my life. He pulled off his microphone and dropped it on the floor. This interview is over. As Harry walked off the set, the cameras caught Jenna and Marcus sitting in stunned silence, clearly unsure how to proceed. The audience remained frozen, having just witnessed something far more raw and explosive than anyone had expected. The final shot lingered on the empty chair where Harry had been sitting, his discarded microphone still on the floor, a powerful symbol of a conversation that had gone too far and revealed too much. What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Did Harry go too far, or were the hosts the ones who crossed the line? Let me know in the comments below.